Michael and I had known each other since school. I grew up in a poor family, while he came from a wealthy one. Michael was always the most desirable bachelor among not only the girls at our school but probably among half the girls in our town. Always fashionably dressed, bold in his actions, smart, and physically well-built, Michael stood out against the background of all the other boys. The most surprising thing was that, despite having a crowd of girls around him, one day, to everyone's envy, he asked me out. I felt both flattered and scared because I was focused on studying hard and preparing to enter our local medical university with a focus on studying Chinese alternative medicine. Therefore, I didn't date seriously until nearly the end of school. Besides, I was convinced that Michael only needed me as another adventure, another target to conquer. It's worth noting that I wasn't lacking in appearance. Genetics had worked in my favor. My mom and grandma were bright and striking women, and it seemed I took after them. Michael behaved tactfully with me, never allowing any rudeness, never being pushy, and even giving me flowers. He didn't mind that I came from a poor family. My mom raised me alone on a teacher's salary. We lived in a one-bedroom apartment and barely made ends meet. Michael said he liked my serious attitude toward life, my pride, and my adherence to conservative moral values. After school, I achieved my minimum goal and got into the first year of our university, while Michael enrolled in international relations. Surprisingly, our relationship didn't end, although it wasn't developing with the passion you see in romantic dramas. Perhaps it was because of me. I was a calm, reserved girl by nature, not someone with fiery blood. I reasoned more with my mind than my heart. 2 years went by. Michael's father became the deputy head of the city administration. His mother's business flourished, a chain of stores across the city, beauty salons, and representation of well-known marketplaces. There were also other profitable ventures I didn't even delve into. Meanwhile, my mom and I were in the same financial situation. I tried to earn extra money in my free time by tutoring. My mom also worked as hard as she could. Michael tried to help me financially, but I never took money from him. I didn't want to feel obligated. Michael's parents wanted to find him a bride from their social circle, but he was head over heels in love with me. When they forbade him to see me, he even overdosed on pills, though, thank God, he survived. After that, his parents stopped forbidding our meetings, but his mother began openly hating me. One day, Michael unexpectedly proposed to me. By that time, we had been together for quite a while, and he decided it was time to take our relationship to the next level. He saw me as a decent wife and a good mother. He was also impressed by the fact that I didn't rely on him financially like his past girlfriends, whom he called beautiful wrappers with rotten insides. Of course, his mother was against our wedding with every fiber of her being. She threw tantrums at her son, claiming he was ruining his future with me. Once, she even tried to offer me money to leave Michael. Strangely, his father, Charles, was not against our marriage. He said that with me, Michael would have a reliable partner and true love. So, despite the strained relationship with Michael's family, I agreed to marry him. I can't say that I was madly in love with him, as I had dreamed of in my youth while watching romantic movies. No, there was no such love, rather, there was respect and a sense of security. I will confess one more thing. Through marriage, I wanted to improve our financial situation, to give my mother a peaceful and decent life in her old age, and to free her from debts. Michael was not stingy and understood our situation. Finally, we set a wedding date. You can imagine that the wedding of a government official's son did not go unnoticed by the media. Although in our town everyone knew each other, many journalists made snide comments about the groom's choice, me. No one insulted me directly, there was no reason to. But the fact that I had, so to speak, grabbed a golden ticket to life was a topic discussed at every turn. Before the wedding, I was so close to having a breakdown that I wanted to drop everything. The public attention was exhausting. But once again, Michael and his father stepped in and took the brunt of the attention. After the wedding, we wanted to move to the capital, but Michael's parents insisted we live nearby. As a wedding gift, they gave us a small house next to theirs. Of course, this wasn't the independent life I had dreamed of. Michael wanted to transfer to a prestigious university in the capital and start his own IT business. I wanted to escape from his mother, who constantly tried to humiliate or insult me. Michael's parents, however, used their power to prevent us from pursuing our plans. His father, Charles, remained friendly toward me. He said I reminded him of his first love, whose name was also Anastasia. After the wedding, he stayed out of our family affairs, treated me politely, and even called me Anna. This infuriated Michael's mother, but in front of her husband, she pretended to be friendly, forcing a strained smile. When we were alone, though, she would insult me without restraint, cursing my family. My mom suffered from her hatred and took it to heart, but what could we do? Yes, we were not equals in social standing, just ordinary, poor people, but we had never been malicious. When I finally had enough, I convinced Michael to ask his parents for money to move to the capital and start a new life. Michael was also eager to leave, but he had grown used to living in luxury and wasn't ready to leave with nothing in his pocket. For some reason, Michael decided it would be easier to talk to his mother, but she immediately refused and said she would disinherit him if he left. That's when Michael backed down, came home, and started persuading me that we needed to stay. That evening, I got very angry with him for the first time, and for the first time, we had a big fight. I told Michael that if he couldn't talk to his parents properly, I would do it myself. The next day, I went straight to his father, Charles. I showed up at his office in the middle of the workday. What else could I do? I was fighting for my happiness and my family's future. I realized that if I went to their house, I'd only encounter Michael's hysterical mother, who would humiliate and insult me again. The visit would achieve nothing. Charles was very surprised to see me, though it was clear he was happy about my visit. He immediately called his secretary, rescheduled some meetings, and said he always had time for me. He offered me tea with sweets and prepared to listen carefully. Apparently, my face showed how much I was at my wit's end. I began the conversation by telling him everything honestly. I didn't hold back about how much his wife had been tormenting me with her insults and hatred. I also explained that Michael had long wanted to leave the parental nest and escape their excessive control. Charles listened to me attentively, nodded, and agreed with everything I said. At the end of the conversation, I added that I was ready to do anything to leave with my husband as soon as possible. When Charles heard this, he gave me an intrigued look and smirked. "Anything, you say?" he asked. I hesitated for a moment, but I was so desperate that I firmly confirmed, "Yes, anything. I have no other choice. Please, help us." At that moment, Charles stood up from his chair, walked to the door, and locked it. He then slowly poured himself a drink and said, "Well, since you're ready for anything, then be my lover. Start fulfilling your duties right now. I can see clearly that you don't love Michael. You're only with him for the money, and I don't feel guilty about this at all. After all, he's not even my biological son, and frankly, he only loves me for my money, too. It's all about the money, my dear. That's just how it is, and unfortunately, he was right. I liked Michael, but I was with him primarily to escape the endless poverty that had surrounded me all my life. I had used him as a chance to break free from that misery. Hating myself, I agreed to Charles's proposition and gave myself to him right there on his desk. Even though I did it for my family, for our independence, I found myself ashamed to admit that I actually enjoyed it. Charles turned out to be an experienced and considerate man, and for the first time in my life, right there on the desk, I experienced the highest level of pleasure. After a short break, Charles and I moved to the large leather couch in his office. Although Michael and I had been intimate many times, he couldn't compare to his father in fulfilling a woman's desires. Charles treated me gently and affectionately. In his large, strong hands, I felt like a small girl who couldn't be hurt but only cherished. Soon, for the second time that day, I reached the peak of bliss. I had never experienced anything like that before. I was deeply grateful to Charles for awakening the woman in me. He, too, was satisfied. He asked me not to tell anyone about what had happened and said that we could start preparing for our move to the capital the very next day. He promised to visit me a couple of times a month. Michael didn't know, and I hoped he would never find out what price I had paid for our freedom. Finally, we moved to the capital, where Michael resumed his studies and began working on his business. In secret, I continued meeting with Charles, my father-in-law. But this couldn't last forever. Michael's mother began to suspect something. She learned that Charles was visiting us too often and decided to hire a private investigator. That's how she caught us. To be honest, after all the humiliation I had endured from her, I felt a sense of triumph when she found out. Seeing her as a helpless and broken woman was satisfying. When she caused a public scene in the lobby of a hotel where Charles had taken me, I calmly watched her and even smiled. Michael and I separated that same day, and within a week, we were officially divorced, no doubt thanks to his mother's influence. Later, Charles also divorced his wife. Their divorce was very public and messy, as she fought for a significant share of his assets. However, Charles managed to keep his position and stay in office. After their divorce, Charles wanted to continue our relationship, but I no longer saw the point. I was glad to finally be rid of that family. I had managed to save a decent amount of money in my bank account, moved back to the capital, and brought my mom to live with me. However, I soon began to notice that something was wrong with my health. A pregnancy test with 2 lines confirmed my suspicions. Now I could, in theory, live life as I wanted. I didn't feel guilty about anything, except for my betrayal of Michael. At that time, I was fighting for my family's freedom, even if my methods were questionable. Still, I knew there was no justification for what I did. I could only hope that one day Michael might understand and forgive me. Especially since the child I was carrying was either his brother or his son. After consulting with my mother, we decided to keep the baby. Time passed. My son, Alex, turned 3. He grew up to be a bright and unique child. He was great at counting money and promised to buy me the biggest house when he grew up. One day, we stopped by a well-known cafe bakery in Moscow. My son loved the croissants there. As usual, after buying our favorite cappuccinos and pastries, we sat at our favorite table in the corner. My son started telling me a story when suddenly, I heard a painfully familiar male voice behind me. "Anastasia, Anna. I'm back." I nearly lost my ability to speak. Standing before me was Charles, my former father-in-law. What is he doing here in the capital? I thought. Charles, meanwhile, was staring at Alex, who looked just like him. Judging by Charles's astonished expression and incoherent muttering, I realized that he understood everything. It turned out that Charles had been promoted about a year ago and had moved to the capital. His ex-wife, having received her share of the assets during the divorce, took Michael and moved abroad. Charles never remarried but said he often thought of me. That day, he had accidentally ended up in the cafe after mistaking its entrance for that of a restaurant where he had a meeting scheduled. When he silently questioned me about Alex, I simply nodded and burst into tears. From that day on, we never parted. Soon after, we began living together and eventually got married. For reassurance, Charles conducted a DNA test, which confirmed that Alex was indeed his son. Now, Charles adores Alex and can't get enough of him. I work in his company as a marketing specialist, and my mom, after retraining as an accountant, works there too. Alex has grown up and started school. Finally, everything in our lives has settled down. Please don't judge me harshly. Instead, support me with kind words. None of us knows what life holds for us tomorrow, so I live for today. I'm happy that my loved ones and I are healthy and have enough to live on. Through thorny paths, we've finally found our happiness.